I'm Diane Blazik. I'm the Executive Director for All America Selections and National Garden Bureau. I have with me from my office, Gail. She'll give a wave there. She's the other one in our office as people come in and out. Oh God, this is fun.
Mary's here.
So I will introduce our panel, which are also National Garden Bureau members, and I will briefly give your name, and then you guys can take a minute or so and introduce yourself and your company. I'm just going to go right down on my screen the way you appear on Zoom. We have Heather Kibble from Cicada, Kristen Noble from Harris Seeds, and Kirsten DeLong from Pure Line Seeds. So Heather, let's start with you.
Sure, Heather Kibble. I'm from Cicada Vegetable Seeds. Cicada is a breeder producer of both vegetables and flowers. We're talking about vegetables today, though. I've been with the company about 11 years, and I specialize in home garden and farmers market type growers, seeds for those folks.
Excellent. And Kristen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Noble with Harris Seeds. Harris Seeds is a dealer of vegetable and flower seeds as well as supplies. We serve professional growers as well as home gardeners. I have been with Harris for 5 years, and I am the Director of Product Management and Vegetable Product Manager for Harris.
Thank you. And Kirsten?
Hi there, I'm Kirsten DeLong. I'm with Pure Line Seeds, and we are also breeder producers of vegetable seeds. I've been with the company about 7 years, and I do marketing and product development.
Excellent. And I was going to say that everybody can take a look at their chat. Gail is putting links to our panelist companies in the chat function, so you can explore each of our panelist companies. And also I wanted to tell everybody that if you have questions, please put them in chat as well, and we will answer those as we can get to them. I wanted to mention that today is World Plant a Vegetable Garden Day, and that is why we wanted to have this webinar today, because what else will get you more excited than getting out into your garden than learning about all these new varieties? So that's very cool. I also wanted to mention that National Garden Bureau has this new plants program. So like our panelists and all of our other members that are both breeders and seed sellers and plant sellers, they submit their new varieties to National Garden Bureau, and we put them on our website. So that goes live every November, which gives everybody out there plenty of time to look at these new varieties and then go find them for their gardens. So that's one of our programs. Another program is the Green Thumb Award, which we'll later mention our edible Green Thumb Award winner for this year. And you will also hear us talking about All America Selections, which is the other organization we run out of this office. That's a plant trialing organization. So some of these new varieties are also AS winners. So with that, I think what we want to do is talk first about the breeding process. So we have two breeders on as panelists, but then we've got some specific questions for Kristen after that. So Heather and Kirsten, I'll let you guys decide which one of you is going first, but talk about the process of breeding, how you decide which areas you're going to focus on and which crop classes maybe you focus on. I know a lot of breeding companies specialize in certain classes. So who wants to go first and talk about a little bit about your breeding process and how you decide which traits you're developing new breeding for?
I can go first. Cicada is a worldwide company. Our headquarters is in Japan, so we breed for many different regions of the world, and then growers will have breeding stations in particular areas that serve growers in certain countries and parts of countries. So like the United States is big, so we have several breeding stations across the country to trial things and breed new products for specific needs for that particular area, if that makes sense. And deciding how, sometimes it's a market need, sometimes it's say a disease resistance need, something like that. You know, a disease might come through and wipe out a bunch of plants. So the breeding companies will start, usually we're working on diseases before they come through anyway, but we'll focus on particular things that maybe have been an issue in particular areas. And then sometimes it's customer tastes too, like customers are always looking for new colors and flavors and ways to use things. Like cauliflower is a good example. It had a big I don't know, upswing a couple years ago just because it became more popular in people's diets in the US. So trends like that are important as well.
Excellent. Kirsten, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I mean, a lot the same as far as, you know, we do focus internationally as well, but our base is here in North America. So that's really where we first focus on is North America. And so for breeding, I guess even maybe kind of a little further too, so we use what's called natural selection. And I'm sure it'd be the same thing, Heather could say the same thing. So it's basically what's been used for years upon years and years. It's just a very old method to, you know, see what kind of traits do I want in this plant. And then you basically just keep taking like the mom and dad, and then you're producing the baby, which would be the hybrid. So it's very simple method that I think a lot of people don't realize when they hear breeding, like, what is that? And it's really just, yeah, it's natural selection. It's no different than like having, like I'm a hybrid of my parents, or if you have a dog, you might have a hybrid of like two different types of dog, or you might have a purebred, but it's still a hybrid of its mom and dad. So it's the same thing in plant breeding that we really focus on at Pureline is, you know, what we might really like this trait and this trait, but we want that in one plant. And so we breed that so it's in one plant. So yeah, and same thing, you know, deciding on what crops. For Pureline specifically, we really focus on a lot of times what is niche. So like peas and beans are our biggest thing we breed in, among other things, but historically that's what we've really bred in. And honestly, that's kind of always been a niche thing to breed in that. So whatever, like Heather said, is needed in the market, or there's kind of a hole there. And then also what's there for the genetic gene pool for us to, you know, work in. And so, yeah, that's kind of, it's just very natural, I would say, just like kind of seeing what's needed in the market, and then what do we have for resources to actually breed in that, because it's not easy to just be like, all right, we're going to just start breeding, you know, in a crop that we've never bred in. I mean, you can do it, but it takes a lot of time and resources to you know, get to where you want to go. So within breeding.
Excellent. Yeah. And, you know, this is not one of the questions we discussed ahead of time, but when you're talking about breeding and you're talking about disease resistance, can one of you talk about all the races? Because I know that, you know, like let's say you breed for disease resistance in this green bean and it's race 1, and then like 3 years down the road, all of a sudden you're realizing, okay, did that disease morph or mutate to a new race? So can one of you talk about that?
Sure, I'm not a scientist, so I'll start with that, but spinach is a good example. There's races of downy mildew resistance, and every year it seems like they discover 1 or 2 new ones that weren't an issue before. So I've been in the industry for about 1 million years, and you know, it might be we had races 1 through 11 back in the day, and then all of a sudden the next year race 12 breaks through and starts, you know, destroying spinach fields. So it's a game of keeping up with that. And yes, they do somehow survive. And so the resistance that you had, maybe for some things, I mean, some things you have resistance or you don't, it's kind of a yes, no thing, but most of the time it's a spectrum of resistance, and then that morphs into something else, you know, and so you're looking for the new, they identify the race and then everybody scrambles to try and find resistance to it, all the breeding companies. Does that make sense?
Oh, I think it makes total sense. And I mean, the good summary is it's something the breeding companies are always working on.
Yeah.
So even if, and Kristen, I think I might let you address this. So let's say you have something and it's a new variety and you know that it has this resistance. Let's just take spinach, for example. Sometimes the consumer doesn't really care which race it is, but I think maybe we should kind of talk about the companies like Harris that are reselling to the consumer. I mean, you're always going to be trying to get the newest variety that has the best resistance, correct?
Yes, we're typically always on the look for the new resistance packages, but in some cases, it depends on the customer base that we're looking to serve. So sometimes there will be, say, a new bell pepper that comes out with one more resistance to a virus, and it may be that that's not a very common home garden issue. And so we'll have that available as a new product for our commercial growers to make sure that they're up to date on the latest. Because like was mentioned when Heather was talking about spinach, if you have a field of peppers and then you get this virus, you're going to lose your whole crop and all of your profits for that year. So it's really important that we have those available. But at the same time, it's not always necessary, depending on where you are in the US, to have all of the disease resistances possible for a certain crop. So it does kind of come down to knowing what you're inflicted with in your area and making your product choices based on that, so that you're choosing products that will solve a problem that you have, not necessarily a problem that you'll never see. So like you had mentioned, as a dealer, we work with a variety of breeding companies, including Cicada and Pure Line. And so we're able to look for different varieties that are suited to different parts of the country and different types of growers in that way.
Excellent. Kirsten, anything you want to add to that?
I think the only thing is that I would add is it is the tricky part as well with diseases is they can be very regional. So they may not show up in, let's say you're in the Midwest, and for us, we have tons of different areas that we're testing the varieties, whether it's internationally, but mainly just, yeah, in North America, you know, we're testing on the East Coast, down South, because there's so many different climates. And sometimes you might be like, yeah, this is totally, it seems to be resistant here, but then I put it down South and it's not. So it's really tricky. And there is different ways to test, like yeah, you can see it visually, but then there's also, you can send it to a lab to get markers and things like that, you know, to really see, you know, does it actually have that resistance built into the plant? But sometimes even there, you know, it's just, it can vary so much. So that's where, you know, sometimes maybe if you do see, get a variety and you do see the disease in it, you just have to remember maybe where you're at or location. Sometimes certain areas, it's like in the East, it's so hard to get away with like powdery mildew and downy mildew. They're just so prevalent out there. So it is really, can be very tricky, but that's why we still have jobs, and that's why we really need breeders because it's just always a challenge and it's just never going to go away. And it's a good thing to continue to breed so we can have food and have things that are resistant, because otherwise, yeah, left to its own devices, they would not do so great.
It's Mother Nature we're dealing with, right? So not only weather, but diseases and regional specific things. So yeah, good point. I do have a question for you here, for anybody really. There are many older varieties that are still excellent. Can you share how you maintain them and offer them to your customers? And then I'm going to add to that, can you also talk about how some of these wonderful older varieties are used in breeding newer versions and newer varieties? So anybody who wants to talk about that can.
Yeah, sure. So that's something we do a lot at Pure Line, is if there's an old variety that maybe somebody wants to produce that somebody else isn't producing, a lot of companies will come to us for that. For example, peas, especially like Sugar Ann, which is a sugar snap, and so it's kind of a long process. So after a while, you know, maybe the public will start seeing that this variety isn't true to type, because everything in plants, they want to go back to, you know, its natural form. And so like a bush bean, it wants to go back to being a pole bean, because that's what it naturally is. So we have to constantly be evaluating, rebreeding, you know, to keep it clean. So to keep like a single variety clean, it takes a lot of work. And yeah, our actual breeders could touch on that even more, but yeah, we might see like Sugar Ann, for instance, the Sugar Snap Pea. It started to not look true to type. It wasn't quite Sugar Ann, and so we took the variety and then we basically backbred it and did all these things to clean it up again. And it just takes a lot of years of replanting it, looking at it, roguing it, which means taking off things that's not Sugar Ann, that may be something else, clean up the variety, and then finally, once it's clean, then you can produce it for the public. So it takes a lot to keep a variety clean that, like Sugar Ann, is an older variety that is great. And it's one of the best out there. I mean, every time I see it, I'm like, this is amazing, but it doesn't just stay that way. Like it's going to need maintenance, almost like your house. You need maintenance because it starts to fall apart. Well, the varieties will start to fall apart. So that's another big part of what breeding companies do, is just like, okay, we got to keep this variety, these older varieties, true to type, and kind of keep them in line. So they're doing what they're supposed to do and producing like they are supposed to be.
Yeah, a lot of work to really get what you're expecting. So if you buy a brand name or a variety name, I know the expectation is there, and it's a lot of work and a lot of time. And so here's another question about natural selection takes time, which we all know. Do you use genetic mapping and programming to figure out which genetics will emerge? If, for example, two peas are bred together, is that part of the breeding process? And if so, how much time does that cut off the breeding process? It's an in-depth breeding question, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
It depends on the company too, and then what your goals are. So for us, we don't necessarily do any of that. But there is a lot of companies that do. So it just depends on what resources, because everything takes money too. So how much money can you put into it? And it does. So if you do mapping and things like that, and there is a level that we do of that, it just depends. But so that does cut your time quite a bit. So you can really figure out all right, this is the specific traits I want to see. But at our company, we don't do much of that. We really do a lot, just the natural, all right, this is, this characteristic and this characteristic, and we just keep breeding it. But there are ways that we can make that faster, because for instance, peas, they can take upwards of 7 years from what you first start with to a commercial product. But you can speed that along by we can do testing or breeding in the southern hemisphere in the winter, and then that will speed up our breeding process. And carrots too, that's the same thing. That can be on the fast side, 10 years and up to 20 years if you're just doing all right, I'm just doing this once a year on my breeding. So there is ways to speed it up. But yes, it just depends on the company, I would say, what they have for resources.
It is even with every computer program out there, it's a very slow process, right? And even with the hemispheres and traveling around and looking at it in different places, a lot of the time, if you want to start a new program or you're going to breed for something your company hasn't done before, you want to get somebody right out of school, because it's going to take 20 years, until. So it's something if vegetable breeders need to be the most patient people on the planet, basically, because it's going to take a long, long time to get there.
Yeah, good point. It is time consuming. What I want to know is about naming of varieties. I always think that would be one of the most fun jobs ever, is to come up with names, but I know that it's not all fun and games. There's a lot of legalities involved and things like that. So who wants to talk about how you go about naming a new variety?
I can start. The USDA keeps a database, so vegetable variety names need to be cleared with the USDA. So it can be really fun if it's a variety where there haven't been a lot of products in that category, because you have a lot of options. Where it's not fun is when everything that you think of has been used before. And you're like, oh, that would have been perfect for this, but somebody used that, 30 years ago, and I don't know that they ever expire. So it feels sometimes like we're running out of names. And then one of the other kind of limiting factors is where are you going to sell this product? Because you don't, if it's super regional and you're only going to sell it in Southern California, say, that's where I am, you know, a surfing name might be fun, but that surfing name may mean nothing to anybody else in the country. So you have to be careful about that. And then it's good to clear it with several people. So a lot of the time, like the breeders will be out in the field and they come up with like pet names for some of these things. And sometimes those turn into the names, and other times like they're not good for marketing, or it doesn't sound like food, or, you know, there's some other, maybe their hobby is car racing, so they name everything after cars, you know, but that doesn't necessarily translate to everybody else. So, but I have a lot of respect for vegetable breeders, and I feel like they should be part of, they're their babies, right? So, you know, you want everybody to have input and not just make it completely about business. So the fun ones are when everybody gets in a room together and just popcorn shouts out ideas. And then something will always stick, I think. And then you go to the USDA.
Come up with a list of like 5 or so in order, and then go, okay, that one's taken, that one's taken. Yeah,
Yep,
that does sound
that's
fun.
exactly it.
Kirsten, anything else to add to that naming process?
Not really. I mean, Heather really nailed it. I mean, I definitely agree. We try to really get the breeders' input first, because they are the artists behind all of this. Like they see the vision, and a lot of times they're like, yeah, this is what I see. This, you know, it might be, it had tons of flowers, and I would totally name it this, or like Heather said, they have pet names. So yeah, try to base it off the breeder, but sometimes it doesn't just fit with marketing, or it could have a bad connotation somewhere, you know, whatnot. So it does take a lot of, I think, teamwork too. You can get in trouble if it's just one person and they're trying to name it, you know, maybe after their grandma or something, and then the variety doesn't end up being good, and then it just doesn't work out. So we try to like, yeah, and that's probably part of it too, is it's part of also commercialization of the variety. So you really want to be sure you're ready to move, because like Heather said, it's stuck with that name forever pretty much. And, you know, you want it to be a good name and a good variety too. You don't want to also go to market too early with a variety and be like, yeah, let's do it. And then it was a great name, and now you lost out on that amazing name. That also, we've experienced that before too. So, you know, there's just a lot of planning that goes with it too, but it is fun.
Yeah, I just love asking those questions, because I think a lot of people are not aware. I mean, number one, how long it takes to breed these things, and then the process. It's not like you can just pull anything out of the air. There's a method to it. Yeah, exactly. Kristen, we want to hear from you, because you are on the buying end for all these seeds. And I just cannot imagine how you can possibly decide. So you go visit Heather and her trials, you go visit Kirsten and her trials, and both of them have multiple trial sites, and you're trying to decide. I mean, you know, like you may say, okay, we can only put 20 new varieties in our catalog or on our website for next year. I can't fathom how difficult that job is. So can you tell us and explain what it takes to go through that? I'm standing in a field and I just tasted the most wonderful sweet corn. Well, what does that mean? You have to get rid of something that's already in your catalog? How do you pick from all these wonderful things?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. And like you said, Diane, the same way that a home garden customer might be looking through a catalog and doesn't know what product to choose, I, in this case, am a customer of Heather's and Kirsten's. And so I'm looking through their catalogs, deciding what to choose for our catalog. And so just like you said, we already have a lot of products. Like was mentioned before, there's a lot of older varieties that are still really great products. So you don't want to bring in something new and just automatically drop something older because you want to have the new best thing. So it really is a matter of balancing that and being really mindful of the products that are performing really well for our customers. And then like was mentioned before with the breeding program, we also look for where we have holes. So as we go into the new season, like right now, we're starting into our planting season ourselves for our trials. So at Harris Seeds, we trial every new product that we add to our catalog. So we've looked at it for at least 1 year before we add it to our listing, but usually it's 2 or 3 years before we'll add it, just to make sure that we are really familiar with it and we know that it's going to perform the same way that Kirsten and Heather mentioned that they're trialing around the US. We also are trialing at several locations, not as intensely as they are because they've already done that work, so we can rely on their experiences there. But we are located in upstate New York, so we do our trialing here in the Northeast, and we also work with a lot of growers around the US who will plant samples of new varieties for us and give us their feedback. So that helps a lot, that we can work with a grower in Utah and know how this new pumpkin did for him and not have to have gone there and planted it ourselves. So that's a really great way for us to get some insight as well. But yeah, it can be really fun too. I kind of call it going shopping when I'm working on my trial plan, because I can just kind of look through all of the different products that are available on the market and see what's new, what's interesting, what might be different that is something we don't have or haven't seen before. And then I'll go through and look at how that new product might compare to product that we already offer. And I'll pick out some items that are very similar, if there are any. Some of the most fun ones is when there's something totally brand new that we don't have anything similar already. But usually in our trials, I'll do a side-by-side comparison of some of those older varieties with the newer ones so that we can know, is the new variety better than what we have? Or is it just different enough that it will serve a new need? So that's kind of how we go about trialing. And then looking at products that we will drop, it kind of comes down to performance. Sometimes it's age, sometimes the products just haven't really picked up a lot of following, and they're just not performing as well. It's usually, it can be like 10 or 15 years before we drop something, but often it may be less than that. If I pick up a new variety and there's not a lot of interest in it after maybe like 4 or 5 years, then we may consider looking to something newer. Or if there's a variety with a better disease package, like we had talked about earlier, we may transition in that way as well. So it's great to have a lot of options, but like you said, it can be really difficult to decide which ones to go with.
Yeah, good explanation. And I want to point out too that both Kristen and Kirsten are judges for All America selections. So when they're talking about trialing and looking at things side by side with comparisons, the two of them definitely have a lot of experience doing that for their own companies, as does Heather, which Heather, we need to get you as an AAS judge. We need to find you a spot near your home in Southern California. Then we'd have all three of you as judges. But other people from Heather's company are AAS judges also. But yeah, I thought I better mention that. I think what we want to do is we want to start giving you guys some time to talk about some of your specific new varieties, which we have on our PowerPoint. So I think, Heather, you're up first. So we can go through some of these. And when you're ready to go on to the next one, just say, Diane, click on to the next one, and I'll do that. So Kristen and Kirsten, you can rest a little bit and we'll give this to Heather and we will let her start by talking about Cabbage Superstar.
Thank you. So we'll look at that. It's just beautiful, right? So this is a new variety that is early. So some of the, as I'm going through, I'll talk about like what were the breeding characteristics that made us think that this was a good idea. So the earliness, I don't think we've talked about that yet, but that's important for everybody because maybe you beat the neighbors to having the first cabbage or the first tomato or whatever, but then also the less time something is in the field, the more likely you are to have a good harvest without having pest and disease, and the rabbits aren't going to eat it. Nobody's going to step on it. You know, just the, the quicker you can get that out of the field, the better. So that was certainly a selling point for this variety. At Cicada, we're very interested in flavor too. So there was good flavor on this one. The quality is good, good head shape on it, nice plant size, things like that are reasons that Superstar was selected. Go to the next. This is bit of gold. So as you can see from this picture, the fruit size was what was very interesting about this. So it's a single or double serving, depending on who you are. We call this a single serve because we like melon. But you can cut this in half and feed it to 2 people really. And so flavor with melon, it's got to be flavor, right? So flavor and aroma on this one. It's got some sweetness, but not too sweet, just the right amount. And also, even though the fruit are small, but you still get a good yield because there'll be a lot of fruit per plant. Also matures in about 80 days, which is a good maturity for cantaloupe.
So I have a
And-
question because
Yeah.
you've mentioned it once or twice already, I think. Are we breeding as an industry? Are we breeding for like smaller size produce in certain areas? I think, Kristen, you would probably say, hey, we're breeding for bigger pumpkins, right? Everybody wants a big pumpkin. But I feel like personal size produce is like an ongoing trend. Is that just my view or is that true?
No, that's true for sure because families are getting smaller in the US. You know, maybe it's not true worldwide, but at least in the US, family sizes are getting smaller. We also have very regular access to like grocery stores. Like most of us don't have to drive an hour to get to a grocery store. So you can be picking up produce every couple days. So, and I think it's a good way to fight food waste too, because if you have a smaller, that's one of my personal soapboxes I try to not spend too much time on, but if you only have 2 people in your family, you don't need a 20-pound cantaloupe, you know, so if you can pick something or grow something more appropriate for your family size, I think that's good. So yeah, that is a trend for sure.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, speaking of large.
Yeah. Okay, so that was small, and I forgot to mention the vine size on that was fairly small. So also something we're looking for 4 to 6 feet. I mean, that's kind of big, but then when you compare that to this giant pumpkin that's 10 to 12 feet, we're also trying to make sure that we have in our product line plant sizes for every garden, right? So if you're somebody growing something in your balcony in a little tiny container, we have something for you. If you've got 5 acres, we want to have something for you too. So, and everything in between. So giant pumpkins is something that it's a lot of fun. Everybody, I think, should grow one once in their life, at least. Large Marge, that was a good naming category. I think we like that. It's kind of a US name, but this is a US product. And it just kind of tells what the product looks like, I think. So color, pumpkin breeding is color. You want a good shell on that so that it doesn't smush, especially with the larger fruit. Smush is a technical term I'm sure they use. You want that plant to be, or the fruit to be somewhat durable so that you can get it to your porch and that it lasts a long time once it's out there. The well-embedded handle is also important because people tend to try, if you're at a farmer's market or you're harvesting in your garden or just it's sitting on your front porch, people tend to try and pick fruit up by the handle. So it's good if you have a strongly attached handle there. And just because it's pretty, we like the contrast between the fruit and the handle color too. This one's a little bit later. So this is 100 days, which, you know, if you start in the beginning of the summer, you could still, in most places, get fruit by the end of the summer. But we also have some earlier pumpkins for folks that maybe their season isn't that long. That's good on that one. This is tomato gold spark. Something we're breeding for in tomatoes is always flavor, of course, but sweetness traditionally can be paired with cracking in fruit. So a lot of the time you get an old-fashioned cherry tomato. It's really sweet and the flavor is good, but as soon as, even before you pick it, and sometimes as you're picking it, the skin will crack, and that means you have to eat it right there in the garden. If you bring it in and try and store it for very long, it doesn't hold very well. So it's good if they have some crack resistance. This one matures in about 65 to 70 days. So that's a good mid-season harvest for people. It's got some disease resistance and it's not too tall. Yeah, so that's Gold Spark. Great tomato. This is a pepper. We talked about bacterial, well, we talked about resistance. So this one has 10 races of bacterial leaf spot. Not crucial for everybody. So if you're in some part of the country where it gets dry during the day and disease isn't a huge issue in peppers, then you have a lot of varieties to choose from. But for folks maybe in the Southeast, somewhere where it's raining all the time and it's not drying out in between the rains, you'll get some of those bacterial diseases. So if you're having trouble growing bell peppers, sometimes it's good to start looking for a disease package. Yeah, just good sized plant on that one. That's it for that one. Red snapper. So this one is trying to solve a problem that a lot of folks have, that it's so hot where they are by the time the tomatoes are trying to set fruit. This again would be like the Southeast Florida, parts of California. It gets so hot that the plant doesn't set a lot of fruit. So this is what we call a heat set variety. So it should perform even if it's hot, even if you have a lot of rain. It's got a good disease package. So even if it's raining every single day and 95 degrees, you're still going to get some tomatoes, which can be a challenge for people. Good plant size on this one. And then 70 days is a good maturity for this size fruit. So that's red snapper. Braveheart. So this plant's about 5 feet tall, which seems big, but for cherries, sometimes they can be 12 feet tall. So it's actually a really good plant size, I think. As long you're going to need to support this a little bit, but you can see the fruit's crack resistant, amazing flavor on this one, just so good. 60 days is early, and then usually with these indeterminates, you start harvesting at 60 days, but as it grows, you'll get more and more fruit throughout the season until it gets cold. Next, I think this is my last one. This is watermelon sweetie pie. So this goes back to family size again, because this is small. It's about 13 pounds. So it's not a teeny tiny thing. You know, this is maybe a 4-person watermelon, depending on what you eat. But not huge. There's a nice thin rind on that, and just amazing color and flavor. It is a seeded variety, but it doesn't have a ton of seeds, so you don't have too many. About 6-foot vines, and 75 days is a good early maturity on a watermelon. I think that was my last one.
Okay, thank you so much, Heather. And Kirsten, now we're going to go to you to talk about some of your newest varieties.
Sure. So this is multi-head cauliflower. This is a really fun one because it sets a main curd. And the nice thing with the main curd, it's really quite large. And then once you harvest the main curd, depending on where you're at, it could set 2 to 4 side curds. And I say depending, it just depends on, because we get some people like, it only set 1 curd. So it just depends on when it was planted. And then, if it's trying to set in the heat, it's just not going to do that because it's very stressful on something like a cauliflower. They like more of the cooler temperatures. So if you get nice cooler temperatures, then you should be able to see 2 to 4 additional side curds. So after you get the first one, so this one is one that we really like. It's a fun, unique one. And even if you just get 1 curd, it is a nice big curd on it. So it's multi-head. So this is Quattro. So this is an allium / chive / garlic, but mainly more or less like an allium chive. So the part that you're going to eat is the leaves of it. And this is fun too because it's both an ornamental and an edible. So it's great for like as a pollinator in your garden because it puts on huge bulbs or huge flowers, should I say. So huge purple flowers and great for bees, butterflies, whatnot. And then the flavor is kind of like a garlicky, it's a little different than a chive. So it's a little bit more garlicky onion. So it's got a little bit of kick to it. It's a little spicy. And then the leaves are fat. So we call it like a fat leaf allium. So it's fatter than your chive, but it works great. You take it, you chop it up and put it, in whatever as a garnish or really just to add a lot of flavor. You don't want to use too much. It does pack a punch, but this is and it's a perennial. So it's going to come back every year, but it also works great in pots or raised bed containers. So it's one that you could put in a pot. And then, depending where you live, bring it in for the winter, or it just might, either die back or it'll come back. So it's a really versatile variety. And then Python. So I don't know if you can see from the picture, this one is also kind of multi-use, but it has very long beans, this variety, the beans aren't necessarily yard long. So that would be like 36 inches. So this is more or less like 16 to 20 inches long. So almost, but not quite an actual yard. So if you're going for that, that's not quite what you're going to get. But this is typically more or less like an Asian type of bean. But yeah, it works great in any way that you cook a bean, specifically in more stir fry. So it has more of that like green hearty flavor. So it's slightly different than what we would eat. But I think this is a really fun one with, yeah, with kids, especially just because it's so different. And then it's really fun to get all those beans, like they just set differently than a normal bean. And then the flowers are really pretty on it too. So this would be great too. You know, you could mix it in, you know, in your garden anywhere, but also in just kind of any landscaping too, because it would trellis up like a pole bean. And then you could just, yeah, put it on like a trellis and mix it in maybe with even some flowers, because it is so pretty too. And the leaves are just a very different shape than a normal bean. So this is a really fun one just for, you know, you plant it, very easy, you plant it, you know, depending where you're at, you know, in June, and then you're going to harvest it in August, and yeah, it's just a really easy variety. So in Python, we liked the name because it looks like a snake. So that is Python. So Rainbow Candy Crush, this is definitely one of our favorites at Pureline. This can also be an edible ornamental. So yes, put it in your landscaping. It kind of puts on this nice bush. A lot of kales will get really tall and stemmy, but this will stay this perfect compact little bush, and no matter how far into the season. Also is very tasty too for being a kale. A lot of kales just, you know, they don't really taste like much, but this does have kind of a slightly sweet flavor, maybe not quite like candy, but it does have a slight sweet flavor. And it was bred to have softer leaves, so it's not so intense. Actually, I have one right here too. So this might be cheating, but I got one right here in a pot. So you can also put it in a pot. This is, I think, an 8-inch pot, and it does great. You know, you can put it in a bigger pot, or just in your garden, and it's going to do fine. So, and then the cooler the nights are, you're going to have a more vibrant pink. So you see in that picture, it's more pink, and it'll get even more pink and purple as the nights get cooler. But in the summer, so this is kind of what it more or less looks like when it starts getting warm out. So it's a little bit more green, purple, but it's still very beautiful. It just depends on your night temperature. So that's Rainbow Candy Crush. And then Rugby. This one's really fun too. So this is an indeterminate, which means it's going to grow taller, but it's also not super tall. Kind of like what Heather was saying, some varieties can get very tall, but this stays a nice height, doesn't get past, you know, 6 inches tall, or sorry, 6 feet tall. The fruit it's a great for saucing, or, you know, just any sort of canning, because that fruit is very, very dense. It's almost like a Roma, and it's got that nice heart shape, or we kind of named it like after a rugby football shape. And then, yeah, just very dense. It doesn't crack very easily, and it's pink. So it's just a really fun variety and very flavorful too. It's one of my personal favorites for canning. It just makes a really pretty sauce, and the color is great. And it's another one that's pretty easy to grow. And then, yeah, our Tutti Frutti Deep Red Desire Raisin. So kind of a mouthful, but this one dries down on the vine as a raisin. So as far as flavor, this is top on our profile for flavor. Even people that are kind of like eating fresh tomatoes, not my favorite thing, which I don't quite understand, but this one, they love this one for just the flavor. It's, you know, sometimes when you're breeding, you know, sometimes there can be overemphasis on like, hey, sweetness. But this one, it has that nice balance of sweet and savory. And so it's great just eating when it's not dried down to the vine yet. So you could, a lot of times it doesn't make it to the raisin because it's just so flavorful. But it also, if you let it probably about 2 weeks after it has a fully mature fruit, if you let it on the vine, it should dry down. So it's bred to dry down on the vine and not mold. So we did a lot of selection to make sure, you know, this variety wouldn't mold up or crack easy. So a lot of things in there to make sure that it actually stays as a raisin. I wouldn't say it dries actually down to like a raisin you buy at the store. It's more of like a kind of like a gummy bear texture. It still kind of has a little bit of moisture to it, but It's really nice. And if you can't wait that long, this is also great. You can just pick it when it's mature and then throw it in a dehydrator, and it just dries down really nicely. So we've done that as well. So yeah, super fun variety, indeterminate. It's just pretty all around, and one of our by far favorite varieties at Pureline.
Excellent, thank you. I always wonder, like, okay, who was the first person to look at this and go, oh, wait a minute, look, it's drying on the vine, and that's a pretty cool feature. It's I love some of those. Maybe it was a surprise, maybe it wasn't, but
yes, breeders are definitely artists for sure.
yeah, yeah, exactly, and observant. That too. Okay, I think now, Kristen, it's time for you to talk about some of the varieties that you guys are carrying from a number of different breeders. So I'll let you talk about these.
Yeah, definitely. So several of the varieties that Heather and Kirsten mentioned are ones that we've heard of from them before and chosen to pick up. So it's exciting to hear more about them. Always some favorites for us there too. But yeah, the first one on my list is lettuce Marziano. So this is a butterhead lettuce, so it has that more tender leaf, and they tend to be a mild lettuce, so they don't get bitter very easily. And this one in particular has a really short core, a really dense head, which was very nice in our trial. And we really loved the deep red color on some red butterheads. It can be a little coppery or a little washed out. And this color was really deep red throughout our trial, throughout the heat of the summer. And then you'll see kind of towards the middle of the head, the leaf will be green on the inside. And we also were really impressed with how slowly this bolted in our trials. So that's one thing that's always fun when we have new staff who joins our team. And I'll harvest a lot of the lettuce, but I always leave some of each plot as long as I can just to see which ones bolt first. And our new employees are always like, why did you leave those out there? You need to pull those out. And I say, no, it's part of the trial. We want to see what happens. So this one stayed for a really long time throughout the heat of the summer without bolting, without being bitter, which is really important, of course. And if you're growing this in your garden, then it gives you some flexibility. Like we talked about before with your family size, if you don't go through a head of lettuce every couple days, then it won't bolt in your garden or turn bitter before you get a chance to eat it. So a really nice variety. Tomato Tropical Sunset is one of my favorites. As Kirsten said, it always amazes me when folks don't like to eat fresh tomatoes, because that's typically where you'll find me at the end of a busy trials day, is over there snacking. But this is part of the Cream of the Crop series, which is from breeder AP Whaley. And so they focus really specifically on beautiful coloration and unique flavors and sweetness. So this one in particular has a really unique fruity flavor. Brix is 8%, so it has a good balance of sweetness and that unique fruitiness. It is a little bit earlier to mature than some others at 65 days. The fruit are a really nice size, and they hold really well on the plant, so you won't have a lot of shattering or cracking in the field. And again, that gives you time to harvest them and bring them inside and not have to eat them all right away, like Heather was saying earlier. It is an indeterminate plant, so it needs a little bit of support, but the yields are really amazing, and it is a really, really unique flavor on this one. Arugula Dragon's Fire is a really beautiful arugula. It has that beautiful purple red vein through a very bright green leaf. So that was a standout for us. It's pretty common to find a standard green arugula, but this is really unique and adds just a little bit of something extra if you're growing microgreens or baby leaf, and it makes it really something a little bit different. But the flavor is really nice. It's got a good spiciness. It's very vigorous and grows pretty uniformly, so you don't have to worry too much about cutting leaves that are all different sizes. They'll be very consistent. And like it says there, you can harvest it at a very early like microgreen baby leaf stage. You can let it go a little bit to a larger leaf, but a really quick crop, a great choice if you wanted to do some small containers on your kitchen counter or something like that to pick from, over time. But we really loved the spicy flavor and that beautiful red vein on Dragonfly. A Stallion Creme Brulee is a really unique product that we were excited to be able to pick up a couple years ago. And it is a specialty shallot. So an Stallion is kind of a cross with a shallot and an onion, which gives it some unique traits that are a little bit different than either of those, shallot or onion. It has a really unique flavor and sugar profile and cooks really nicely. So it's used a lot in certain gourmet recipes. And it's got that really pretty coppery pink skin and then really like a pink purple ring through the center. It's really easy to grow and easy to peel, which is a difference from some standard shallots that they can kind of put up a fight in the kitchen when you're trying to peel them. The creme brulee peels really nicely, and it's a really versatile for cooking. One of my favorites for sure. And it also stores for a really long time. So that's helpful as well. If you plan to grow a bunch in your garden, you can harvest them and they'll store well for you through the winter. So something unique and different, but it really is an awesome variety. Eggplant Fairy Tale is a really pretty white eggplant with purple striping on it. Because it is a white eggplant, it is non-bitter. So sometimes you can get that flavor that's maybe not so desirable with an eggplant. But this one is non-bitter. The plant is also semi-spineless, so you won't get poked when you go to harvest them. This one really stood out to us, one, because it's very unique color and patterning, but it is a very compact plant that grows especially well in containers and small space gardens. So if you really like eggplant and you don't want to dedicate a lot of space to a standard size eggplant variety, then this is a really nice one for small containers. And because it has those pretty fruit, it can give a little bit of an ornamental angle as well. The fruit they're kind of a baby eggplant, so you can harvest them at 1 to 2 inches for baby fruit, or they'll get up to 6 inches at full size. So again, with small portion sizes, like we talked about before, this is a nice choice for that.
And Kristen, one of the reasons that I put this in is it's not necessarily a new variety, but it's a new variety for Harris. And I was kind of curious, do you ever put some things in your assortment and then discontinue them for whatever reason and then bring them back? Was that one of these? Or is it just, hey, we've heard all about it and we just decided to add it? Because it was an AS winner maybe, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago or something.
Yeah, this calls back to the comment before about old varieties still being really great varieties. So this one in particular, Harris Seeds had carried in the past prior to my time at Harris, and was discontinued again prior to my joining the team. So I don't know the reasoning there. But sometimes, just the same as we're looking for new varieties from our breeding companies, we be sure to keep an eye on older varieties that maybe we overlooked at the time that they came out, or that we carried at one time and dropped and have come back. So in this case, it was one that we had carried before, but as we looked at it in trials, we felt that it was a good opportunity for us, that we didn't have anything like it. And we're seeing, again, like we talked about before, the trend towards patio varieties for containers and for personal size fruits and all of those things. So in some cases, it just maybe wasn't the right time. When we picked it up before, there wasn't a lot of interest. But as the trends change and people's desires and what sort of products they're looking for change with the times, then things kind of come back around. Pepper Dragonfly is another one that's a really beautiful, kind of some of those that Kirsten had mentioned, an edible ornamental in a way. So it is a standard bell pepper, but it's got a really beautiful dark purple color, and that's the immature color, so it will mature to red. And because you're harvesting the immature fruit, you can get an earlier harvest off of Dragonfly, or you can let some fruit stay on the plant and turn to red. One thing that was really important to us when we were looking at these varieties was that the immature fruit had a really great flavor and good sweetness. Sometimes with peppers, if you're harvesting the immature fruit, it hasn't had that time to ripen and really reach its full potential for flavor and sweetness. And you can get some unique flavors that maybe aren't that desirable sometimes. So just like was mentioned before, flavor is really important as we're evaluating varieties. And this had a really nice sweetness in the immature purple fruit. And they're very thick walled, and they have good disease resistance as well. And there's a note there about plant architecture. The fruit sit high in the plant. So that's something that we really like to see for varieties for home garden, especially, that the fruit isn't going to be lying on the ground in your garden. It'll be held up nice and high on the plant and keep it clean and protected from bugs. And so we really like Dragonfly for all of those reasons. And then tomato Marzito, this was my pick from last year's trials. So we trial hundreds of varieties each year, and there's always one that I end up taking home with me each time that I visit to evaluate it, and that was Marzito for me this year. So it is a mini Marzano tomato. You can see the shape there is kind of like a Marzano elongated shape. It's kind of, the fruit is the size of a large grape tomato. But because it is a mini Marzano, it has that texture. It's a little bit of a denser texture, and it's really versatile to eat fresh or to cook with. The flavor is a really rich, complex flavor. It's not really heavy in sweetness. It's not very tart. It's just got a really nice flavor profile for all of those varieties of uses. And the texture is pretty firm, so it cooks down into a sauce really nicely as well. It is an indeterminate plant, so you would need to stake this one as well. But it does have a good disease package, so that's definitely a perk for you in your garden. You don't have to worry about those later season diseases coming in and taking it out.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I'm taking my screen share off since we're finished with all of the new varieties that everybody was talking about. And of course, our time has gone pretty quickly, but I think what I want to do is summarize by asking about container gardening. I heard each of you mention it a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about the trend toward more and more container gardening. I know with AAS, we're doing container trials with our edibles, and the breeding work or the selections that you're doing, Kristen, on choosing varieties for containers. So I'll give each of you a minute or so to talk about container gardening and vegetables for that trend before we close up for the day.
I'll go first. So yeah, container gardening is a huge area that we're focusing on. I mean, ask us even 5 years ago, been like, no, sounds cool, but maybe not. And so with that, there's a lot of varieties that maybe we already had within our breeding program. Like for instance, peas, will be out and we'll have like 200 different varieties of peas in one field. Like who knew, so many different peas. And then there's 2 varieties specifically that were like, my goodness, those would work great in a container. And then of course, with that, then we start to actually breed towards that, and specifically for it, because there's a lot of traits that it needs to have. We have a lot of like tomatoes and peppers that are specifically for containers, and they really need to tolerate being in a container. So they need to be drought tolerant. They need to, if they do get droughted out, that they revive again. So we do a lot of testing with that. We'll throw them in like just extreme conditions, where there's no light, because maybe somebody wanted to bring it inside, or put it in a truck so it ships. Just a lot of things, and it really needs to stand the test, especially in containers, because it's pretty intense to be growing in a container. It has less soil, less water, so there's a lot of characteristics that we're looking for with the containers. But yeah, something 100% that we're dedicating a lot of breeding, and have specific varieties that are bred only for containers, whether that's tomatoes, peppers, peas, just a lot of things. So either keep an eye out for it or breeding for it.
Heather, Kristen, which one of you?
I'll go. Yeah, I agree with everything Kirsten said. Plus, in Southern California, I think maybe it's been a trend, like maybe California in general, a little bit longer, just because we have such small lots here for our houses most of the time. People just in the cities anyway don't have a ton of space, so containers have been important for a long time. And then also, as water is always an issue here too, they can be, it's a challenge because you're right, like it can dry out in a day. So if you have a container garden in some places here, you need to be sure to be watering it every day, sometimes twice a day. So watering's an issue, but it uses less water. So it can be very friendly. And I think it's very inclusive for people that maybe are living in apartments or condos and, you know, just don't have this space. It's a way that they can still be involved in gardening and know about where their food comes from, which is super important, I think. And yeah, so a focus for Cicada for sure. Maybe because of containers, but then also just because of smaller amounts of farmland, which is a similar kind of issue, right? The farms are getting smaller, the space is needed to be used better. So any plant that can grow in a smaller space is good in a lot of ways for a lot of different uses.
Excellent. Okay, Kristen, any closing thoughts since we haven't given you a chance to talk about containers, but you get to have the final closing thoughts. How's that?
Wow, well, thank you. Yeah, I can certainly echo all of the comments that Heather and Kirsten had. And closing thoughts overall, I think certainly we would all encourage you to be adventurous in the varieties that you try. You may have some tried and true varieties that you really love for your garden. But I hope that you can rest easy to know that we're all over on this side of things, trialing everything really intensively. And we can, if we encourage you to try something that we really love, we hope you'll give it a shot and know that we think it'll do well for you and that you'll maybe find a new favorite.
Wow, couldn't have put it better myself. I think we will all say yes. Thank you for those thoughts. That's exactly what we would encourage everybody to do as well with their gardens. So I thank you guys. This was great. Loved your insights, your knowledge on the trialing and breeding process and talking about all these new varieties. And I want to try every single one. If only I had more garden space, but hey, I'll grow them in containers, right? So thank you very much to all of our attendees. Thank you for coming on. We have this recorded. We will download it and put it on our YouTube channel and send it out as an email to everybody. So thank you to our experts. Have a wonderful day, have a wonderful weekend, and happy gardening.